Starting an Airbnb business is not easy, but it's also not impossible. If you just really give everything, you focus on this to make this possible and to make it work, there's so much possibilities, especially here on the African continent. When you look at the growing tourism the continent experiences in most of the countries, when you see like how the competition looks, there's still so much potential and so much more things you can do, especially if you look at the competition. And therefore, for today's conversation, I brought Wayne from Plan Back to Africa, because she also built multiple Airbnb businesses in different African countries. And now we've also together brought to life a community where just Airbnb hosts are investing here on the African continent from the diaspora or other investors as well, to make this possible and create very unique experiences and actually make this a viable business. So therefore, I see you in the conversation, because this is all about how to start this business from Wayne's perspective, and I see you there. A question that most people ask, either from the diaspora or people who want to invest in the African continent, that are having maybe little to no touch points. And today I also brought Wayne here because she went through this journey multiple times here on the African continent, and we also together work on Homebase Africa and created this beautiful community where people also the first time start the Airbnb business on the continent, optimize, and having the same questions. And therefore I thought it might make sense to have Wayne here today and answer, or like that we talk about this together. So thank you so much for being here, Wayne. For everyone who doesn't know Wayne, she's also moved 2 times to the continent, has been running successful Airbnb businesses across the African continent for the last couple of years, for a while now. And so I'm very glad to have you here today in this stream.
Thanks for having me, Marvin. I appreciate
you for being here, Wayne. So I would say maybe what helps all of us is the best if you maybe share your story of how you started the very first time your Airbnb business, because that's what most people I think are in the process of doing. So how was it like for you? What was your challenge, and like how did you go about it from knowing nothing to where you actually got the first booking or to actually be able to operate?
Well, it actually started. The Airbnb business model caught my interest while I was still living in Germany. A friend of mine who was traveling around the world and started his Airbnb business in Southeast Asia, promoted it, and even offered a master class, an Airbnb training program. And so I saw in him the lifestyle that he was living was the lifestyle that I was also imagining for myself, having a location independent business that I could run from everywhere in the world. And then while at the same time generating good money, good revenue that allows you to, travel the world. And so I was inspired by his journey, and then also decided later on to, invest into this masterclass and build the necessary skills. At that time, I'm not sure if I already had a specific place in mind, but I knew I wanted to start that on the African continent. And so I when I invested in this masterclass while I was still in my full-time job in Germany, and also had my Amazon business on the side. And so I used every spare time to soak in all the knowledge in my breaks, in the evening, in the morning before bringing the kids to school. And then I got the opportunity to work for the Ministry of Tourism and Culture in Ethiopia. What was the ultimate reason, for the final decision that I made, that I decided, okay, I'm taking this position. It's a 6-month paid position, well paid. And so from the income that I am making from this position as a consultant, I decided to invest that money into building my Airbnb in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, my first one. And so I was ready in terms of that I had all the necessary knowledge, that I understood how the Airbnb business model works. And I decided for the rental arbitrage model. So basically to rent a space and then transform it into a short-term rental. And I started with the property that I also wanted to live in to minimize the risk. So I chose the property that is owned by my family. And first, I was looking at many different properties. I found so many beautiful ones, and my mom was joining me, and she was just shaking her head and was saying, like, why don't you invest into your family property, right?
Mm,
But I think what held me back at that time was no, not just I think, I'm sure. I visited that property and it was a mess. Local
mm,
people were living inside that house for, I don't know, 10 years, and they totally destroyed it. But the potential was there because it was a 10-minute walk from the African Union headquarters. And
mm,
so later, I finally decided to invest into the renovation of that space. And so when I started, I think the biggest challenge I had when I started was that many things that we were taught in the master class didn't apply to the African context. Like, for instance, when it comes to turnovers and managing cleaning, right?
mm,
We learned in the master class because it was an Airbnb training program, I would say, that was more designed for countries in the developed world where there's an established infrastructure where you have cleaning companies, that you
mm,
can book online, and where you welcome guests, not necessarily yourself, but where you install a lockbox or a smart lock.
mm,
And so I had these new challenges navigating a country where there is no cleaning company, where you have to build your team from scratch, where you have to train your team yourself, where you work with people who don't speak English, and where you cannot just install a lockbox.
mm.
So it was tough in the beginning, but yeah, I did it anyway.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Happy to hear it now. I see, like, you have been doing it for a long time, like, and of course, I can also imagine that there have been a lot of challenges, like from, like, now this was the process of like finding or like picking the property and actually like starting this kind of business. But what was like the necessary steps then? Like, of course, you said you have to renovate some things there, of course, but then like how was the process then afterwards? Like, you have the property, you know which location it is, you renovate it, you finalize it, and like how then did it look after? Did you immediately get your first few bookings when you went live then, or like were there still things that were challenging and tough for you? Like, what was there the biggest challenge for you?
I think we have to go back to the renovation process
Mm,
because that was a real challenge. If you, and that also taught me that if you want to build a house on the continent or do some major renovations, right, you have to be on the ground, or you need to have someone that can supervise the constructions, who has the same standards
mm,
like you,
mm,
right? And so we really renovated the entire house from scratch. It had 5 bedrooms, a communal big kitchen, and 3 bathrooms. And so, just to give you an example, I was working full time during that time, as mentioned earlier. And so, in the meanwhile, they were renovating the house, and I was renting a space for me and for my children. And so, during my work break, I had to always go to the site, to the construction site, and see how it's going. And then also, I insisted on choosing the materials, the tiles, the
mm,
design, because I had a clear vision of who my niche is, my who I want to build this space for. And since it was so close to the African Union, I was thinking of creating a hybrid setup, even though the Airbnb business focuses on short-term rental, but I also saw a lot of potential in long-term and mid-term rentals. For instance, volunteers who come for 1 month or 3 months, and
mm,
even international professionals who want to stay for a year and even more. And so I knew what the standards of this type of traveler is, and my biggest challenge was I knew that stable internet is very important for them, but in the neighborhood there was no fiber. There was no You couldn't install an internet line,
mm,
So I had to find ways to, offer an alternative that works for them, and then eventually decided for these portable Wi-Fi routers. And then the next challenge was that the quality of the construction was so horrible, and I had my cousin supervise it, and I realized he has so different standards than me, and he wouldn't see the same things like me. Like, for instance, one day I came from break and I saw that the in the shower, the, how do you call it, for the hot water and for the cold water, right? They were not on the same level. They were installed into the wall like this, and all it took was just basically use how do you call it, this balancing tool that you use if you drill, to make sure it's on the same height. And my cousin said, "What do you mean? It looks perfect to me." And I was like, "Can't you see?" Like, it made me crazy that people don't, they will not necessarily see your vision, have the same standards of quality. And so you have to be really like strong and firm when you address issues. Every time I entered the construction site, the construction workers there, they were like, "Oh my God, here she is again," I
Yeah.
felt bad at the time, but I knew I have to make sure that this vision that I have comes to life. And because of that, to adjust certain things, because of the tiles that I choose, the material that I chose, the expenses in renovating and setting up the space were exceeded my expectation. And so the biggest challenge, I think, there's one moment I remember so vividly. It was when I finally was able to furnish all the rooms, which was also another struggle, because of, if you want good furniture, you pay a lot, and the rest is like trash made in China, has no soul. But I was able to furnish everything. It wasn't perfect, right? I knew that there are still many things missing. That's one learning I made. It doesn't have to be perfect to start. I decided at a certain point, when also the money was getting tighter, I just start with what I have now, and then slowly improve and reinvest the money that I'm making. And then I followed the whole script, that we were taught in the Airbnb masterclass. I knew what I had to do. I took pictures. After renovating and furnishing everything, I listed everything. And then the night, I will never forget it. The night when I finally listed the property, right? The first night, I was lying in my bed and I couldn't sleep the entire night. I was just staring at the ceiling and asking myself, Wayne, imagine you get not a single booking. I spent more than 10,000 US dollars in renovating everything. And I was so scared. What if all of this was for nothing? Because renovating and furnishing the space, as I said, it was a construction site, took over 4 months. 4 months of driving back and forth from the office to the construction site, all the money, all the time that I invested. And I was lying in my bed the night when I listed the property finally, and asking myself, what if nobody books your place? And then the next day, I think it was in the middle of the day, ting, I got my first booking. I cannot describe that feeling, honestly. So yeah, I think it's a roller coaster. There's so much uncertainty, But I later learned from other business owners that they all made a similar experience. For example, one friend of mine, she scaled her business and moved into a more expensive property where she wanted to offer her service, right? It's a different industry. However, it was a significant investment that she made, moving to a more affluent area to attract more affluent clients. And she didn't know if this will work out, invested a lot into moving, investing, buying new equipment. And she had the same fears that night. And I think that's like part of growth, right? Like, you're trying to scale, you're trying to grow, you make an investment, and there will always be, at least from my experience talking to different business owners, they all had the same fear when scaling or expanding their business. What if I fail? What if this was for nothing?
I agree. I mean, it's part of like entrepreneurship, like it's you always at some point you are so confident that it works. You put all the energy in. The closer you get to launching or to actually finalizing things, you're like, oh, what if everything was like for nothing right now? So I feel the same thing. And then
Wasn't it the
once you get
same with our Homebase Africa
yeah, it
community?
was the same thing, like why I was so confident, and the closer we got to actually being ready and being done with everything, closer I was like, what will I do when nobody needs this, like when people are maybe want something completely different. And then once you start getting then the first response, and you're like, okay, you're relieved, and you can go back in again and focus again. And this was that is I think it's a normal natural part of the entrepreneurship, like you have challenges, you are not we of course as entrepreneurs we try to minimize the risks as at all costs, of course, but there's still a certain extent some kind of like gap between what you know and what you think will happen and what actually will happen or could happen. It can be much worse, can be much better, but it's like I would say it's part of business, right? Part of
Yes,
business.
absolutely.
Yeah, cool. So just another question from myself, because I think in Ethiopia you already had like your people on the ground. You said you had your cousin and everything, but what is usually one other very important step for starting this kind of business is like how to find then the people. Like how do you then when we look at when you built your Airbnbs in Zanzibar, how did you manage this part? Because there you also had no family on the ground, just to bring these two together.
Yes. So I wouldn't say it was necessarily more easy in Ethiopia. It just came with different challenges. So in Ethiopia, I had a big family, relatives, who all wanted me to employ their children, my cousins, other distant relatives. And so the challenge here was that um, getting them to take it seriously, making sure they take it seriously, because they had some kind of, at least like felt like more safety, that even if they mess up, that I wouldn't dare to fire them. You know what I mean? So it was challenging with them being on time, taking the job seriously, and work, understand my standards, and instead of arguing with me, right? And whereby in Zanzibar, it was a totally different challenge. It was finding people overall where you have no one. However, you know that if you find someone, that person will probably take it serious, because there is not this bond, you know, that you can look for someone else anytime. And so the way I found my people was because I already had trusted people on the ground in Zanzibar. Since the first time, it was not the first time that I visited. I spent quite some time, one time 3 months and another time 1 month, when I was still studying, one time in 2008 and in 2009. I understand the language, I speak it a little bit, and then I was also always in touch with my contacts on the ground, who became my friends. And then when I visited Zanzibar for the first time 13 years later, after I spent there my time during my studies, I started, working with the people I know. And they also helped me to find cleaners, reliable cleaners. It didn't always work out, since I was running that business remotely, you know. And yeah, there were certain differences and challenges, but minor challenges, like having a system when it comes to cleanings and turnovers, also being on time. But I was able to manage. There were certain principles I insisted on, since I knew I was running this business remotely in Zanzibar. Since at that time I was still living in Germany, so first, the persons that I hired, I made sure they all have a smartphone. You know, that was the precondition, so that I can reach them anytime.
Mm.
let's say when you get a last minute booking, right?
Mm.
Secondly, I'm sure they at least at the beginning it was the case that I made sure the person lives in the nearby village,
Mm.
so that also in case there is some, let's say, emergency, they can be on site immediately.
Mm.
And the landlord basically became my property manager. I involved him in the business and built win-win situations, like for each booking that he would accept the welcome the guest, I would give him a commission. And then from there I got to know more and more people, you know. I traveled to
Mm.
Zanzibar more often, mainly because of the business, you know, and so
Mm.
made more contacts. And that's how I found my team, through people that I trust on the ground. And
Okay.
then I
Yeah. Yeah.
trained
Yeah.
them
Mm.
trained them with YouTube videos. And also while I was there with my mom,
Mm.
trained them together, showed them
Mm.
how to, you know, keep hygiene standards high, what to look out for. Yeah.
Mm. Okay, yeah, super interesting. Just yeah, because I think it's a big part of like the uncertainty you have, you know, when you start, especially this business for the first time on the African continent. You don't know many people, or you don't know many people you can trust. Therefore, I think it's really, it's as you said, it's very important to be on the ground if you can come more frequently and spend more time and nurture like the connections you made, and like really try to build and meet people that are also maybe having a similar vision, you know, like even if it's on a different scale, but like make sure that they will grow with you in case you really are willing to build a bigger business, and like that you are also willing to help them in the end of the day, you know. I think it's
Yes,
also always right. One of the things I think we also try to work on is also like teaching them more skills, helping them to grow themselves, and also make them eventually, if they that's what they want, to have their own businesses and like also make more money, right?
exactly.
Mm.
Exactly. So yeah, I for me it was always important to empower my staff,
Mm. Mm.
to show them that my goal is that we all grow together. When I win, then they will win as well, you know?
Mm.
And I did that by raising salaries step by step. The more the
Mm.
business grew, then teaching them skills to take over new tasks in the
Mm.
Airbnb business. And yeah, incorporate their small businesses into my business, you know? And
Mm.
so it's so important. However, it can be, you know, balance, like you know, the relationships that you build with your staff, right?
Mm.
To
Mm.
keep the bound
Mm.
as a foreigner. And when I say a foreigner in Ethiopia, when I come to my home country, I will be seen as a foreigner,
Mm.
right? So to make sure to build authority, that people take you seriously,
Mm.
right? And I think that what helped me is just by leading by example. I
Mm.
never shied away when I was on the ground to help cleaning the house. You know,
Mm.
I took over a lot of tasks, and that alone is a big surprise to, I would say, many people on the African continent, because it's quite unconventional seeing a woman painting the house
Mm.
and building furniture. Whereby in Germany, you know how it goes, Marvin, right? We go to
Mm.
IKEA, we buy the furnitures, we build them on our own, we paint our homes on our own. So
Mm.
that's the things that I learned. And then I think that helped me also to gain respect, that
Mm.
them seeing me, I don't shy away from cleaning a toilet. I don't shy away from, you know, sweating with them, working with them.
Mm.
And this is
Mm.
how I was able to kind of, I would say, build kind of a team spirit, you know, that we are all in this together.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I like that. It's as you said, it's very necessary, like to really make them own this as well, you know. So I like that, you know. And I know you also have to leave very soon, so let me do one last question. Yeah, and this would be like, now from all your experience over the last couple of years, like in total? What was like the hardest part in total, and why do you still think it's worth it to do this kind of business, like to do an Airbnb business or short-term rental business here on the African continent?
Good question to think about this, because there were so many challenges, especially when I started in Ethiopia.
Mm.
I think from my entire journey, the hardest part was when I once invested into a property
Mm.
on the island of Zanzibar and it was not performing as expected.
Mm.
And I tried so many things to make it work. So, for instance, I started with this 4-bedroom house, and then I launched in right on time for the high season in November. But because of the lack of limited capital that I had, I just did the basics and missed out on investing on one essential thing, which is ACs, air conditions.
Mm.
And it gets blazing hot in December in Zanzibar.
Mm.
And so I started without air conditions and received bookings immediately, because by then I already knew how this business works, right? Had a great listing, and the house was beautiful, but then cancellations flew in. Guests would
Mm.
check in after one night, they would say, no, we can't take the heat. We rather pay $100 per night to have an AC, you know?
Mm.
And I started at a very low price to first keep it going, the business going,
Mm.
and,
Mm.
collect revenues. And then I invested into, it was difficult because before investing into ACs, I had to invest into building windows, because before there was just mosquito nets.
Mm.
So I invested a lot of money on having the ACs and the necessary, constructions to support AC. And then came the low season. I didn't
Mm.
plan for, but rent has to still be paid, because it was also a rental arbitrage model.
Mm.
And then came the high season, and I wouldn't get any bookings. And it was because I marketed the space to anyone instead of to someone specific. I didn't pick a niche. The mistake I made was believing that a great location and a cozy home will make people to book, that's enough, because it was really a prime location, second line of the beach.
Mm.
And no matter what I tried, because I didn't realize that in this moment that I had the wrong strategy, this Airbnb was costing me more than it was making.
Mm.
And there were multiple times I was on the edge where I was thinking, shall I let go? Shall I sell everything and give up and just focus on the other properties that were performing extraordinarily well? And but also, like, at a certain time you really at the edge, because you realize that you don't even benefit from the revenue that the other Airbnbs are making, because they
Mm.
are keeping this Airbnb afloat.
Mm.
So I think that was the most challenging time, to not stop trying, to not stop believing in the potential,
Mm.
and to rethink your strategy,
Mhm.
which I eventually then did. I refused to give up this Airbnb because I knew it has potential, but I had to admit that I had the wrong approach. And then
Mm.
when I realized the mistakes that I made and reverted them,
Mm.
developed a new approach, a new strategy, and picked
Mm.
a niche. It's incredible when I look back. I really wanted to give up this property, which is now one of my, not if not the best performing property of
Mm.
mine. And what I'm saying is, like, it's like a spiral downwards. You try everything, and then the mistake I made is going down with the price, slashing prices to
Mm.
the floor. I think at my lowest point, when I hit rock bottom, I was asking for $19 for a
Mm.
room with
Mm.
AC,
Mm.
second line of the beach. So the profit
Mm.
margin would have been maybe $2 per night. Ridiculous, because you pay
Mm.
for
Mm.
internet, you pay for electricity, you pay for rent, you pay for your stuff. And I was still not getting booked. And on top of that, I was attracting the worst types of guests that you can imagine. You know, cheap guests that even ask for the hair on your head, you know, for the little money they paid and expect
And more
every
discounts.
yes, more
Mm,
discounts, more discounts.
mm,
Yeah, I'm happy that I, stayed like committed to making this work. And
mm,
now I charge up to $250 per night.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then maybe let us know why do you think it's worth it investing into this kind of business here on the continent after from your personal experience?
It's actually simple, I
Mm,
mean, the numbers don't lie. So we have 12 out of the 20 fastest growing economies on the African continent. The tourism industry on the continent is booming. And
mm,
because of the overall development on the African continent, right?
mm,
There is a growing middle class, and with the growing middle class comes more domestic travel.
mm,
New air connections are happening. I think Kigali, Rwanda, is starting a direct flight to Zanzibar soon, and then also the visa restrictions are getting better. So, for instance, when I started in Zanzibar, Ethiopians needed a visa and invitation, a long process to visit
mm,
Zanzibar. And now it's also visa free or visa on arrival, I believe. And so after that, I saw so many Ethiopians coming to visit Zanzibar and also to invest in Zanzibar.
mm,
Then let's take Zanzibar as an example. They hit a record in July and
mm,
welcomed over 100,000 visitors in a single month.
mm,
So it's the tourism industry is booming, really. Africa is such a beautiful continent, so diverse, with so many things to offer, the most beautiful beaches, the most breathtaking landscapes, and amazing wildlife. And you see that big hotel chains like Marriott or Hilton are expanding their operations.
mm,
And this should tell you enough.
mm,
Therefore, I believe that investing, and just besides that, like real estate, especially if you buy land, I bought two pieces of land in Zanzibar. It's one of the best investments because while you save it on your foreign bank account in the US, where the dollar is devaluing and where inflation is rising, right, it loses its
mm,
value. But if you invest it into property and real estate or just a business on the continent, it will appreciate very fast. And so I
mm,
believe that are the main reasons. Of course, there are many reasons. I think maybe just to mention one more reason why it's
mm,
great to start an Airbnb business, especially when you have a certain connection to the country where you want to start, right? Airbnb, before the tourism industry, especially in the accommodation business, was
mm,
dominated by big professional, well-established hotel chains, international hotel chains. When I visited Zanzibar for the first time in 2008, there were only luxury resorts. There was maybe
mm,
one hostel in Paje. But now, thanks to different short-term rental platforms, little players like me and you, we, for the first time, get access. The local community gets access and can
mm,
finally participate in the tourism industry and benefit from the wealth, the money that is flowing into these countries, right? And
mm,
so
mm,
I believe when you offer a place to stay, when you have a story to share, right? When you can offer an experience. And that was one thing that really, really gave me so much joy in Ethiopia is that you can shape the experience of visitors coming to the African continent. And I think in a world where Africa is still portrayed in a very negative light with so many stereotypes,
mm,
you become part of reclaiming the narrative by
mm,
showing through your space that you create, right? A different side of
mm,
Africa. I used to take my Airbnb guests in Ethiopia with me to church, show them how
mm,
the real life is, the local life. Welcomed a lot of
mm,
Ethiopian adoptees that are looking for their biological parents and who want to get to know their roots. So through the knowledge I have from my studies, I was able to, you know, share my knowledge, my experience. And I think that is, so for me, it was never honestly about the money. For me, it was about reclaiming the narrative, shaping the image of Africa, empowering local communities, and building home bases for me and my family. And then money is like a side,
The byproduct, yeah?
a byproduct of that, right?
Yeah, I can see that from the passion you have for it. Yeah, I would say I appreciate you very much for sharing this, Wayne. It's such a beautiful way of looking at things, you know? It's just by creating and having an impact, like giving back to people and like creating something that is more than just a house or like a bed, what really is connects people's stories. I think this is also like one of the recipes to also send out, you know, like to really give this what you do, like this Airbnb or short-term rental business, a deeper purpose, what people can also feel them when they come to your place and stay at your place. So I like that approach a lot. And yeah, I think for now I would leave you to it. In case you guys are not following Winnie, her link to the channel is in the description. And otherwise, also we have, as I mentioned in the beginning, we have this Homebase Africa community where we help hosts or like aspiring hosts to invest here in the African continent, and especially not doing it alone. You know, the hardest part always, I think, for every one of us who started a business here on the continent and wants to do something is that you are alone. You don't know anybody, or you don't have the right people, or like you cannot relate to the people. So therefore, we have this beautiful community where we really support each other to build this kind of business like all together. And therefore, if you this is something what you're interested in, just check out the link in the bio as well. And then I would say we see you there. And otherwise, if not, I hope this video gave you so much free value that you can start this as well. You got more courage for now. Yeah. Thank you so much, Wayne.
Thank you,
And
Mark.
I see you
Thank
in
you
the
for the
next one. Yeah.
amazing work you're doing, for inspiring so many people, sharing your knowledge. I appreciate you. And I
Same to
look
you.
forward to see you again here live.
Yes, we'll do. Yeah. Thank you so
Bye.
much. Yeah. Bye bye.